Most cybersecurity advice about home networks tells you the same handful of things. Change your default router password. Update your firmware. Don't use public Wi-Fi without a VPN. That advice is fine, but today I want to talk about a threat that doesn't care whether you followed any of that advice, because it doesn't target you directly at all. It targets the device sitting quietly in the corner of your living room that you probably haven't thought about since the day it was installed. Welcome to Cyber Safety Brief, where we explain simple cybersecurity advice for everyday Americans. Before we get into it, a quick note. This video is based on authentic, legal, and publicly available cybersecurity information. Everything here is for awareness and protection only. I won't be explaining how to access or exploit any device, and nothing here should be used for anything other than protecting your own home network. Point 1. The devices nobody thinks about. Let's start with a question. When you think about cybersecurity threats to your home, what comes to mind? Probably your phone, your laptop, maybe your email account. What almost nobody thinks about is their router, and even fewer people think about the smart devices connected to it. Smart TVs, streaming boxes, smart plugs, security cameras, all the little internet-connected gadgets that quietly sit in the background of modern homes. In my opinion, this is precisely why these devices have become such an attractive target in 2026. Security researchers have documented large networks built from hundreds of thousands, in some cases millions, of compromised home devices, many of them ordinary routers and streaming boxes, that were quietly turned into what's called a proxy network, without their owners ever noticing anything was wrong. Point 2. What a proxy network actually means. Let me explain this in plain language, because the technical term residential proxy network sounds confusing, but the concept is actually pretty simple once you break it down. Normally, when someone connects to the internet from a data center or a known server, that connection can look suspicious to websites and security systems, because data center traffic behaves differently from a real household's traffic. What attackers have figured out is that if they can route their traffic through a real home internet connection instead, your home internet connection, for example, their activity looks completely normal. It appears to be coming from an ordinary residential address, just like any other person browsing the internet from their living room. That makes it far harder for websites, banks, and security systems to detect and block malicious activity, because it blends in with completely legitimate traffic. The way I look at it, your router or your smart TV becomes something like an unwitting middleman. Your device isn't being used to steal your personal data directly in most of these cases. It's being used as a stepping stone, a disguise, so that someone else's malicious activity looks like it's coming from your house instead of theirs. Point 3. How this actually happens. I'm not going to walk through technical exploitation steps, but at a conceptual level, here's what's worth understanding. Many of these compromised devices were affected because of outdated firmware containing known vulnerabilities, weak or default administrator passwords that were never changed, or, in some documented cases, hidden backdoor access built into the device's software by the manufacturer or a component supplier, sometimes without most users ever being aware such access existed. In 2026, researchers publicly documented cases where certain router firmware versions from specific manufacturers contained undocumented authentication methods, allowing administrative access to the device without needing the actual password at all. This isn't a hypothetical, theoretical risk. It's something that has been formally reported and confirmed through legitimate security research. What most people underestimate is that this kind of vulnerability doesn't require you to do anything wrong. You don't need to click a bad link or download a suspicious file. The router simply sits there, connected to the internet 24 hours a day. And if it has a vulnerability like this, it's potentially reachable and exploitable without any action on your part at all. Point 4. Why your Wi-Fi still works fine. Here's the part that I think is genuinely unsettling, and it's the reason this threat is so hard for regular people to notice on their own. If your router or a connected device has been quietly recruited into one of these networks, your own internet experience usually doesn't change in any obvious way. Your Wi-Fi still connects, your Netflix still streams, Your video calls still work. There's no dramatic slowdown or error message telling you something's wrong. In my opinion, this is exactly why traditional advice like, "You'll know if something's wrong because your device will act weird," doesn't really apply here. A well-designed compromise of this kind is specifically built to be invisible to the device's actual owner, because the entire value of the arrangement for the attacker depends on it staying unnoticed for as long as possible. The moment you notice and unplug your router, that connection stops being useful to them. Point 5. A real-life example to make this concrete. Let me describe a hypothetical realistic scenario, purely for illustration. Imagine a family with a smart TV that's been sitting in their living room for 3 or 4 years. It was a great deal when they bought it, it still streams shows perfectly fine, and like most people, they've never once checked whether it has pending software updates, because who thinks to update their TV? If that particular model had a firmware vulnerability that was discovered by security researchers or attackers after the family bought it, and the manufacturer either didn't push an update or the family never installed one, that TV could, in theory, become part of exactly the kind of network we're describing, all while continuing to stream cartoons for the kids every single evening without any visible sign of a problem. In my opinion, this story isn't scary because the family did anything unusually careless. Almost nobody updates their smart TV's firmware regularly. It's scary because it illustrates how a completely mainstream, normal household habit, just using your devices and not thinking about their internal software, can be enough for a device to become part of a much larger problem without anyone realizing it. Point 6. Why this matters beyond just you. I want to add a perspective here that I think gets overlooked. When your device becomes part of a network like this, the harm isn't only theoretical or only about you. Your internet connection could be used to mask activity connected to fraud, cybercrime, or other malicious operations, meaning your home IP address could end up associated, at least superficially, with activity you had absolutely nothing to do with and never authorized. What I personally think is that this adds a layer of civic responsibility to home network security that doesn't get talked about enough. Securing your router isn't only about protecting your own data, it's also about not becoming an unwitting participant in a larger criminal infrastructure that gets used against other people entirely. Let me know in the comments if this angle changes how seriously you take router security. I think a lot of people are more motivated to act when they realize the stakes go beyond just their own personal risk. Point 7. What you can actually do about it. Now, let's get practical. First, log into your router's administrative settings, usually through a web browser using an address like 192.168.1.1. Though this varies by manufacturer, and check whether you're still using the default administrator password. If you are, change it immediately to something unique and strong. This single step closes one of the most common entry points attackers rely on. Second, check whether your router has a firmware update available. Most modern routers let you check this directly within the admin settings, and many newer models can be set to update automatically. If you're not sure how, search for your specific router's model number along with the word firmware update and follow the manufacturer's official instructions. Third, extend this same habit to your other connected devices. Smart TVs, streaming boxes, smart plugs, security cameras. Most of these have a settings menu where you can check for and install software updates. It's tedious, I'll admit, but doing this once every few months for each device is a genuinely meaningful investment of a small amount of time. Fourth, if your router is old, genuinely old, more than 5 or 6 years, seriously consider replacing it. Older routers frequently stop receiving security updates from the manufacturer entirely, which means any vulnerability discovered after that point simply never gets fixed, no matter how carefully you check for updates. Fifth, consider setting up a separate guest network for smart home devices, separate from the network you use for your computers, phones, and anything involving sensitive logins or banking. Most modern routers support this, and it means that even if a smart plug or a smart TV is compromised, it's isolated from the devices where your actually sensitive activity happens. Point 8. How to tell if something might already be wrong. While this kind of compromise is designed to be subtle, there are a few signs worth periodically checking. Log into your router's admin panel occasionally and look at the list of connected devices. Do you recognize everything on that list? An unfamiliar device name is worth investigating. Also, check your router's outbound traffic or activity logs if your model supports it. Unusually high or constant data usage, especially overnight when your household isn't actively using the internet, can sometimes be a sign worth looking into further. I want to be honest that these signs aren't foolproof, and a well-hidden compromise might not show up clearly even to someone checking carefully. That's exactly why prevention, keeping firmware updated and passwords changed, matters more than detection after the fact in this particular scenario. Point 9. The manufacturer responsibility question. I want to spend a moment on something I think doesn't get said enough in cybersecurity content aimed at everyday consumers. A lot of the advice in this video puts responsibility on you, the device owner, to check settings, update firmware, and monitor your network, and I do think that responsibility is real and worth acting on. But in my opinion, device manufacturers carry an enormous share of responsibility here too, particularly when documented cases involve undisclosed backdoor access built into a device's software from the manufacturing stage itself. What I personally think is that consumers shouldn't have to become amateur network security experts just to safely use a router or a smart TV. Manufacturers should be building devices that are secure by default, that receive automatic security updates for a reasonable minimum number of years, and that are transparent about any remote access capabilities built into their products. Until that becomes the industry standard everywhere, the practical reality is that the burden falls on individual households to fill that gap themselves. I'd like to know your opinion on this. When you're buying a new router or smart device, do you factor in the manufacturer's track record on security updates, or is price and features usually the deciding factor? I think most people, myself included at times, default to price and features, and I think that's worth reconsidering. Point 10. This applies everywhere, not just the US. For everyone watching from the UK, Australia, and Canada, this exact pattern applies to you just as directly. Home routers and smart devices sold in every one of these countries have been documented in similar compromised networks. The advice in this video, checking default passwords, updating firmware, separating your networks, works identically regardless of which country you're in, because the underlying vulnerabilities and the attacker techniques exploiting them aren't restricted by national borders. Point 11. Why old devices are the real weak link. I want to spend a bit more time on something I only touched on briefly earlier because I think it deserves its own moment, the specific problem of device age. Most people replace their phone every 2 to 3 years, largely because carriers and manufacturers push upgrades and because phones physically wear out. Routers and smart home devices don't follow that same replacement cycle at all. It's completely normal for a router to sit in the same spot for 6, 7, even 8 years without anyone thinking twice about it, as long as the Wi-Fi light stays green and the internet keeps working. In my opinion, this mismatch between how long we actually keep these devices and how long manufacturers actually support them with security updates is one of the most under-discussed problems in home cybersecurity. A router that's 5 years past its last firmware update isn't just missing new features. It's sitting there with every vulnerability discovered since that last update, permanently unpatched for as long as it remains connected to the internet. What most people underestimate is that this creates a kind of silent expiration date on every connected device you own, one that has nothing to do with whether the device still physically works. The remote control still works. The Wi-Fi signal is still strong, the smart plug still turns your lamp on and off, but the software underneath might be years out of date, with known, publicly documented vulnerabilities that the manufacturer has no further intention of fixing. Point 12. A simple habit for auditing your home network. Let me give you one habit that I think covers most of what we've discussed today in a single, repeatable action. Twice a year, maybe when the clocks change, since that's an easy date to remember, walk through every internet-connected device in your home and ask 3 questions for each one. Is this device still receiving security updates from the manufacturer? Does it currently have a pending update waiting to be installed? And does it still need a default or weak password changed? For most households, this audit covers a router, a couple of streaming devices, maybe a smart TV, a few smart plugs or bulbs, and possibly a security camera or smart doorbell. Going through this list takes maybe 20 to 30 minutes total twice a year. In my opinion, that's a remarkably small time investment given what it actually protects against, especially when you consider that a single compromised device sitting quietly on your network can affect far more than just that one device. If you find a device that's no longer receiving updates from its manufacturer at all, which does happen, especially with budget smart home gadgets, that's a genuine signal to consider whether it's worth continuing to use or whether it makes sense to isolate it entirely on a separate guest network where it can't interact with your more important devices. Point 13. The bigger lesson. I want to close with a broader thought. The way I see it, one of the biggest shifts in home cybersecurity over the past several years is that the threat has moved beyond your computer and your phone. Every connected device in your home, your router, your TV, your smart plugs, your cameras, is a small computer running software that can have vulnerabilities. And most of us have never once thought about any of them the way we instinctively think about protecting our laptops or phones. In my opinion, the practical takeaway isn't to be afraid of smart devices or to rip your smart TV out of your living room. It's to extend the same basic hygiene you already apply to your phone and computer, updates, strong, unique passwords, periodic checks, to every device sitting quietly on your home network, because attackers in 2026 are clearly paying close attention to exactly the devices most people have completely stopped thinking about. Let me know in the comments if you agree with this shift or if you think this is overblown for the average household. I'm genuinely curious how people feel about this one because it's a topic that tends to split opinions. Point 13.5. A note on guest networks and family members. One last practical point before we wrap up. If you share your home with family members, roommates, or frequent guests, it's worth remembering that your network security is only as strong as the least careful device connected to it. A teenager's gaming console, a visiting relative's outdated laptop, or a roommate's cheap smart speaker can all introduce the exact same risks we've discussed today, regardless of how carefully you personally maintain your own devices. This is actually the strongest practical argument for setting up a separate guest network, which I mentioned earlier. It's not just about isolating your own smart home gadgets. It's about giving visitors and less security-conscious household members a way to connect to your internet without ever touching the same network segment as your personal computer, your banking apps, or your most sensitive files. Most routers manufactured in the last several years support this feature, and it's usually just a toggle away in the admin settings, yet very few households actually turn it on. Point 14. One more myth worth retiring. Before we close, I want to retire one more common belief. I'm just a regular person. Nobody would bother targeting my home network. I think this is one of the most understandable but also most misleading assumptions in all of cybersecurity, and it applies especially strongly to the topic we've covered today. Here's why it's misleading. The kind of compromise we've been discussing isn't about anyone specifically targeting you as an individual. It's automated. Attackers scan huge ranges of internet addresses looking for devices running vulnerable, outdated firmware, and when they find one, it doesn't matter whether that device belongs to a celebrity, a small business, or someone who has genuinely never done anything remotely interesting online. The device simply becomes useful because of what it is, an ordinary home connection, not because of who owns it. In my opinion, this is actually the most important mental shift in this entire video. You don't need to be interesting to be a target. You just need to be reachable and unpatched. And that reframing, more than almost anything else, is why I think basic router hygiene deserves the same default attention as locking your front door. Not because you expect a specific threat, but because leaving it undone makes you an easy, anonymous option for anyone scanning for one. If this video helped you understand online safety more clearly, like the video and subscribe to Cyber Safety Brief for more simple cybersecurity advice that actually respects your time and your intelligence. Stay alert, stay informed, and stay safe online. Before you go, comment below whether you've ever checked your router's admin settings before or if today is the first time you're even thinking about it.